to introduce our very first speaker. He's the Director of Exhibitions and Programs at Auckland Museum. He has a tech background in the States. He's been a New Zealander for over a decade, a museums geek for 4 years, and he's still figuring out what he wants to do when he grows up. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand for Rusell Briggs.
Hi, I'm going to talk about World War I in 5 minutes, so I'm going to talk really fast because I have to cover an entire World War in 5 minutes. You probably never think about World War I. I think about it all the time. At the end of 5 minutes, you're going to know why it's something you should be thinking about, why it's something that shaped our civilization, why it's more important than anything that happened after the Industrial Revolution, including the Holocaust, including the dropping of the atom bomb, including the internet, including television. But I guarantee by Anzac Day 2015, you're going to be so sick and tired of this. So I like to be the first one to talk about these things. After that, it's going to get more and more and more, and then you're going to be completely over it. So the skinny on World War I in 15 seconds. 6 million people dead? No. 6 to 8 million soldiers. 16.5 million people altogether. 1 million killed in one battle? Yes, Verdun. You should go there if you go to France. It's like the Disneyland of death. New Zealand did not have the highest number of people killed per population. Serbia did, 16% of its population. We only had 1.6%, but we had the highest percentage of soldiers get wounded or killed for the amount of people that served, which means we got all the shittiest jobs. Why do we still care when it's not nostalgia and it's not just memorial? Let's look at what's going on in the land there. The land is still scarred. 20 to 30 new bodies are pulled out every year. 100 years later, 200 tons of ammunition is still pulled from the land. This country is still coming to grips with it 100 years later. Rudyard Kipling decided that we were from the uttermost ends of the earth. That is the last time anybody actually talked about New Zealand that way after World War I. It kind of put us more in the center of the picture, and that's a big deal for us. In Europe, they're still rebuilding. This is the great market of the town of Ypres. This is what it looks like now. They've rebuilt the entire town in the 20th century to look like the 1600s, which is pretty amazing. That kind of reworking is still going on to this day. In order to deal with all the death, these kind of monuments were put up. They're incredibly intimidating. It's like looking at a starry sky and wondering how small you are. They're huge. It's, I think, a symptom of the fact that we still don't know how to get over these things. People have dealt with it in aesthetic ways. There's a lot of war art out there. There's strange intersections of faith and messianistic trends along with the serving of soldiers. But I think, to me, it's just still this open question of how you deal with that enormity of death and enormity of loss. A lot of people say that the modern started in World War I. I think it's true. We know about the poetry. This is Wilfred Owen at the bottom, Siegfried Sassoon, the kind of art that came afterwards, the whole idea of Bambi discovering the bones of somebody is sort of a modern, postmodern thing. But even in the modern day, there are connections that are still quite alive. And these are actual street names in towns in northeast France, the French flag and the New Zealand flag wrapped up, a grave of a Maori battalion soldier. A lot of these World War I graves lie unconsecrated by Kaumātua and Kuia. We hope to actually take care of that over the next few years. But these are things that are sort of open issues that still compel us and we still care about. But the big question for people like me is, how do you connect younger people to something that happened 100 years ago, where all memory, family memory, the people have died off a long time ago, and so there isn't that intimate memory anymore. So how do young people come to care about something that happened so long ago? Well, you can ask questions. One of the questions is, what's an army? To an Egyptian, an army was a savior. You go down the Gulf, you look at Bahrain, and the army was a source of terror and a source of murder. What is an army? That's the exact same question that was being asked 100 years ago, and we still don't have an answer. If you're a 16-year-old that would have been conscripted during World War I, and you're plugged in, and you're following what's going on in the world, and you believe in freedom for people, would you go to the other side of the world to fight and die? This is a Victoria Cross winner. Henry James Nicholas is buried in a tiny churchyard in northeastern France. Remembered because he's a VC winner, but that's a long way away from home. Would a 16-year-old do that now? Is the lessons of World War I the clean, white, ordered rows of Tyne-Cot Cemetery, or is it tens of thousands of people marching in Yemen with a machine gun perched over them, ready to let loose at any moment, potentially, and kill them all? And then in terms of the imagery, In terms of connecting with younger people, I mean, this is Paul Nash, the famous British artist here, the legendary Otto Dix from Germany. But if you look at these images, don't they look a lot like the graphic novels and comics that we grew up with, the things that are being made into movies now? Is there a connection there? And then the way that we deal with the timing of things. John Singer Sargent, the most famous war painting, came out a couple of years after the war. This is how people found out stories of the war. Now you have Twitter, it comes out immediately. How are we shaped as a society between the different types of communication vehicles? Museums try to deal with this in different ways. Imperial War Museum's putting together these personalizable pages so that you as a family can come in, find out about a family member and find out everything about them. That's the kind of things we're going to be trying to deal with. Last slide, this is what Ferdinand Foch said. He's buried next to Napoleon. He was kind of important. 20 years later, it was World War II at Yalta. They said the same thing, and then the US was in Vietnam 20 years later. In the 80s, they said the same thing with the Russians and Mujahideen, and look what's happening in Afghanistan now. That's why World War I still matters. Thank you.